Hungarian Folk Tales. The Poor Man's Vineyard. Once upon a time, in a far-off land, there lived a poor man who had 3 sons. The poor man had a tiny vineyard, but he owned no more than that. And he guarded his vineyard as if it were gold. His sons would also take turns to stand watch at the vineyard all day and all night. One morning, it was his eldest son's turn to guard the vineyard. And the boy sat down and started to eat. While he was eating, a frog hopped out in front of him and said, "Give me a bite of bread, young man. I haven't eaten for 2 long weeks." "When pigs learn to fly," said the young fellow, and he chased the frog away. The frog left in silence and the boy fell fast asleep. When he woke again, the vineyard had been so badly ravaged that the boy was filled with fear. Next day, the middle boy went to the vineyard. He too was asked for bread by the frog, but he also chased the frog away and threw a stone at the beast. Then he lay down, fell asleep, and when he awoke, less than half the vineyard remained. "Hey," the poor man moaned, "all we have is this tiny vineyard and they can't even look after that." Then the youngest boy said, "Worry not, father, what is left will be safe now, for I shall guard it." So the youngest son went to the vineyard, sat down to eat, and the frog hopped out and asked him for bread. "But of course, here, take some." Then he broke off a crust and gave it happily to the frog. "Eat, frog, for you are one of God's creatures too. You are a good boy and you will be rewarded for your kindness in time. Now I shall give you 1 copper, 1 silver and 1 golden rod. During the night, 3 horses will come, 1 with a copper mane, 1 with a silver mane and 1 with a mane of gold. They will come to trample your vines, but if you strike them with these rods, they will be tamed in an instant." The night came at last and the 3 horses galloped in, kicked and neighed and threw earth up into the starry sky. But the youngest son was soon to act and hit hard at them with all 3 rods. Then the horses were tame and stood and stared like 3 simple sheep. "Don't hurt us," the horses pleaded. "But should you need help, wave the rods in the air and we will appear." Then the boy went home. But the youngest son decided not to tell his brothers and his father of what had happened that night. All 3 were surprised by the crop that was so abundant they could barely gather it in. And no one in the village had vines as rich as theirs. Time passed slowly by, and one day the king decided to erect a pine tree outside the church. Then he placed a golden sprig of rosemary atop the pine tree and told the world that he would give his daughter's hand in marriage to the first man who could snatch the golden rosemary from atop the pine tree. All manner of men tried their hand, but none could jump higher than half the height required. And when all of them had crept away in shame, a fine fellow appeared on a copper-haired horse. He wore a copper helmet so his face could not be seen. Then he spurred his horse on, leapt high in the air, snatched the golden rosemary and rode away. The copper knight was the poor man's youngest son, of course. He went home in his tattered clothes and was sitting in the corner when his father and 2 brothers returned to the house, because they too had witnessed the joust. His brothers told the youngest one what they had seen. "I too saw what happened. But how is that so?" "Because I stood atop the fence and watched from there." His brothers were so furious that they smashed the fence to stop him watching again. The next Sunday, the king placed a golden apple on an even taller tree. Many men tried their hand, but all again in vain. But as they walked away in shame, a knight appeared aback a silver-haired horse, and the knight wore a silver helmet to hide his face. With one jump, he grabbed the golden apple and vanished. By the time his father and brothers returned, the youngest son was sitting in the corner again. They quickly regaled him of what they had seen, invisible to him from the corner. "Oh, I saw it better than both of you. How is that so? I climbed atop the pigsty roof." The brothers were so furious that they tore the pigsty down to stop him watching from there again. The third Sunday came, and the king put a golden scarf atop the tallest pine tree. And it was the poor man's youngest son who again snatched it off. He escaped and recognised again because he rode a golden-haired horse and a golden helmet to hide his face. At home, the brothers both bragged of what they had seen. "I saw it better than both of you." "How is that so? Where from?" "From atop the house roof, of course." His brothers were so furious that then they pulled the roof to pieces. Meanwhile, the king declared that the knight should appear who had taken the golden rosemary, the golden apple, and the golden scarf. But the days became weeks, the weeks months, and no one came forth. Then the king summoned all the men in the land to his palace. But the famous knight was still not among them. All of them gone, a young man appeared with hair and clothes of gleaming gold. The golden rosemary in his hat, he led his horse with the golden scarf, and he held the golden apple in his hand. Thank heaven he had appeared at last. The king was delighted, and the princess overjoyed. The wedding was held the very next day. The king gave the golden knight half of his kingdom, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The pin, the dog, the crayfish, the egg, and the cockerel. Once upon a time, a very long time ago, there was a little pin that was very bored in the sewing box. And the little pin thought it would go out and see the world. The pin walked and walked, and as it was walking along, it met a dog, and the dog said, "Where are you going, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the world." "Then I shall go with you too." "Please do." They walked and walked, and as they were walking, they met a crayfish. The crayfish said, "Where are you going to, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the world." "Then I shall go with you too." "Please do." They walked and walked, and they were walking along when they met a rotten egg. The egg said, "Where are you going, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the wide world." "Then I shall go with you too." "Please do." They walked and walked, and they were walking when they met a cockerel. The cockerel said, "Where are you going to, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the world." "Then I shall go too." "Please do." They walked and walked until they arrived in the back of beyond, and night began to fall around them and the sky grew dark. The four of them looked for a place to lay their heads for the night, but they found themselves in a vast forest and searched for a place to sleep. Then they caught sight of a cottage where they decided to go and ask for shelter. They walked into the cottage, but found that it was empty inside. It doesn't matter that no one's at home, we can still sleep here for the night. And each found a place to lay its head. The pin stuck into a towel, the egg rolled into the ashes, the crayfish sat in the wash basin, the cockerel roosted on top of the fence, and the dog lay down on the shady porch. Then they all fell fast asleep because they were tired from all the walking they had done that day. The cottage was owned by 3 foxes that had gone down into the town to steal chickens from farms as the darkness descended. Now the 3 foxes came running home. As they ran, twigs cracked under their feet, and the cockerel heard them approaching and crowed a warning to its friends. The foxes stopped for a second when they heard the crowing, but then they ran quickly on. Then the dog took notice and began to bark. The foxes stopped again when they heard the dogs barking. What could be happening at the cottage, they thought. But then they carried quickly on. When the foxes arrived, the cockerel crowed, the dogs snapped at their heels, but they carried quickly on into the cottage. But a terrible surprise still awaited them. The father fox said to its son, "Quickly go and look for a coal in the ashes, that we can light a lamp and see what's happening in the cottage." One of the fox's sons went to the fireplace and sorted through the ashes. But the egg blew up in the fox's face, so it ran to the basin for water where the crayfish lay that pinched the fox hard. It tried and tried to shake the crayfish from its paw. It grabbed the towel to dry itself and the pin pricked it sharply. "Run away! We need to run from this terrible place!" And the foxes ran and ran and ran away, and may still be running till this very day. Hungarian Folk Tales. Pinko. Once upon a time, there lived an old woodcutter who was poorer than a mouse. One day, the woodcutter said to his wife, "Wife of mine, please bake me 2 corn cakes that I can take them out to work with me so that I won't have to come home to eat." So the woodcutter's wife baked the cakes, put them in the woodcutter's bag, and he set off to work in the forest. Down in the forest lived old Paluto, and old Paluto had a young son called Pinko. Pinko listened keenly to the sound of the woodcutter's axe and watched the old woodcutter from the shadows. Then the crafty boy took the woodcutter's bag down and gobbled up both the corn cakes. But old Paluto got wind of what his son had done. "Where are you, Pinko?" old Paluto called out to his son. "Here I am, father." "Come quickly, where have you been?" "I have just gobbled up the old woodcutter's corn cakes." "As you felt no pity for the poor woodcutter, you will now have to serve for 3 long years in return. Do you understand?" This news saddened Pinko, but he agreed to do his father's bidding. So he turned on his heels and went back to the woodcutter. When he arrived, he said, "Woodcutter, I am the one who ate your corn cakes. So be happy, my child, and don't sound so sad. But it doesn't work like that because my father has punished me and told me that I should work as your servant for 3 long years. There is no need, my child, because I could never pay you, but I can earn my own living." And wonder of wonders, Pinko plucked the trees from the ground and knocked them together to make neat logs to be stacked. By the time night came, he had cleared the whole forest. "Can we go home now?" "Yes, but first I want to gather some sticks for the fire." Pinko set hard to work and gathered up so much firewood that even 20 oxen could not have carted it home. Then he lifted the poor woodcutter up and placed him on top of the pile. The very next day, the poor woodcutter went to the rich farmer to tell him that he had felled, cut and stacked all the wood for winter. The farmer was reluctant to believe him, and so he sent servants to see for themselves. They returned in the evening and informed him that the forest had been cleared and neatly stacked for winter. So the rich farmer was forced to pay the poor woodcutter. Then the woodcutter made his way home, where he and Pinko agreed that they should seek work with the Baron the very next day. "You came at the very best time," the Baron told them, "because the field I have to plough would take 100 men, a year and a day to complete." So the old man went to the market with Pinko, where they purchased 2 young calves and then went back to the field to plough it. There were very many men ploughing with a dozen oxen. So Pinko strode out to the middle of the field, and by noon he had already ploughed more than all the other men put together. The other workers were so impressed by Pinko's calves that they asked for what price he would gladly sell them. But Pinko was proud of the calves and asked for a sack of gold along with the 12 oxen. They bargained and bargained until the Baron agreed to pay Pinko's asking price. The sack of gold was measured out for him, he was given the 12 oxen, and then he was sent on his way. The Baron's men began to plough the land with the 2 calves, but however they pulled and pushed the tiny beasts, they would not work. They quickly reported the bad news to the Baron, who ordered them to search for Pinko and bring him back at once. The men soon caught Pinko. Then Pinko took the handle of the plough in one hand, cracked his whip with the other, and the calves began to plough as never before. "This is how you should do it," he told them, and he went home. Back at home, he and the woodcutter discussed where Pinko should next seek work, and they agreed that he should visit the king the very next day. "You came at the very best time," the king told them, "because the corn I have to thresh would take 100 men a year and a day to complete." They went to the barn that was piled to the rafters with corn to be threshed. But Pinko grabbed one stack and threshed it in no time at all. Then he took all the rest of the wheat, oats, millet and barley and threshed it all before the day was done. Then Pinko went to the king to tell him the corn was threshed. "Oh, but you shouldn't have done it like that." "Why, what did I do wrong? The wheat, the barley, the oats and the millet should be separate." "That's no matter. I shall sort them apart." And no sooner had he spoken than, wonder of wonders, the grain all stood in neat piles. "What payment do you ask for your hard work, son?" "Only 1 sack of wheat," Pinko said. "Very well, you may come and collect it whenever you wish." Pinko returned home, and he and the woodcutter gathered all the canvas they could find and spent a week sewing the sack. Now let's go and collect our payment. The next day they reported to the king, who ordered his bailiff to fill Pinko's sack with wheat in payment for his work. Then they went to the barn and began to fill the sack and shovel all the grain in that Pinko had threshed. But that was only enough to fill one small corner of the sack. So the farm bailiff went back to the king and told him the size of the sack that Pinko had sewn. The king said, "I have agreed, and so I shall pay, but he will never be able to take the big sack away with him." So the men continued to fill the sack with last year's grain and the grain from the year before, and the sack still was not full when they had used up wheat from the last 10 years. "What kind of king is this man who cannot pay me for an honest day's work?" Pinko complained to the bailiff. Then Pinko took the enormous shack and swung it over his shoulder, and he and the poor woodcutter left for home. They walked away without even saying goodbye, and when they got home, there was much celebration. Now they had grain, wood, oxen and gold, and could at last live a happy life. As the months turned to years, Pinko said to the woodcutter, "I have been with you now for 3 long years, so I will leave you in the morning." The woodcutter pleaded and appealed for him to stay, but Pinko left for home. And when Pinko got home, there was much celebration, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The 7 Kids. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there lived a mother goat. And the mother goat had 7 young kids. One day the mother goat said, "Now be careful, children, because I'm going to the meadow to bring you fresh grass to eat." "Don't worry, we'll be good," the little kids said. So the old mother goat set off for the meadow, and then she shouted back, "And don't let any strangers in, because I won't be back until evening." The wily wolf had been listening outside all this time. "Well," he thought, "I have my chance at long last." Hardly an hour had passed before the wily wolf went to the window and called into the kids. "Darling children, open the door because I have brought fresh grass for you to eat." The little kids laughed when they heard his gruff voice, "But our mother will only be back in the evening, and her voice is much sweeter than yours." The wolf was furious and ran away until he came to a field full of turnips. There he pulled up a turnip from the ground and ate it to make his mouth dry and his voice sweet. Then he hurried back to the house and called to the kids, "Darling children, open the door because I have brought you fresh grass to eat." And the little kids were about to open the door when the eldest looked out of the window and saw the wily wolf's bony black hand and shouted, "Don't open the door because our mother has white hands, not black." The wolf was furious for a second time. Then he thought for a moment and ran until he came to the village bakery. When he arrived, he asked the baker for a sack of flour to make his hands white, but the baker was busy kneading bread and asked him to wait. But the wily wolf was very impatient and could not wait a moment longer. "I'll be dining on goat meat tonight," and he hurried back to the house. By the time he arrived back, it was late in the day, and he put his hand up onto the windowsill. With his white hand and his sweet voice, the kids were convinced that their mother had returned from the meadow at last. Then the wolf shouted into the kids, "Darling children, open the door because I have brought you fresh grass to eat." And the silly kids jumped for joy because they had fresh grass at last. One kid hid under the bench, the second in the corn bin, the third in the ash bucket, the fourth in the wash basin. The 3 other kids stood petrified in the middle of the room. They were all so terrified that they would happily have hidden in a matchbox, but there was none in the house because their father did not smoke a pipe. Then the wily wolf pulled the kid out from under the bench, the kid out of the corn bin, the kid out of the ash bucket, but the clock door was so small that his long tongue wouldn't fit inside. "Oh, how full I am," he said, and stroked his fat belly. Then the wolf went out to the meadow where he lay under the mulberry tree and soon fell fast asleep. As evening fell, the mother goat returned home from the meadow and nearly died of shock when she saw the door wide open and her little house empty. She began to call, "Kiddie, kiddie, come here." She was sitting and crying when she suddenly heard a tiny voice speak, "Don't cry, mother dear, because I am here." Then the last of her kids appeared, who was delighted to see his mother, but even more delighted to see the fresh green grass. "And where are your brothers?" Then the little kid told his mother how the wily wolf had tricked them. "Oh," his mother said, "so that is who I saw resting in the meadow when I was walking home. Hurry, child, and fetch me a needle, thread, and a pair of sharp scissors." And while her son searched, the mother goat took a rest after a very tiring day indeed. They soon arrived at the meadow, where they saw that the wolf was still sleeping. "Gather rocks, quickly, quickly!" Then the mother goat slit the wily wolf's belly open, and the other 6 kids leapt out. "Now let's teach the wily wolf a lesson," the mother goat said, "and fetch as many rocks as you can while he is still asleep." They soon collected a big pile of rocks and packed them into the wily wolf's belly before their old mother stitched it back up again. Then she told her kids to hurry back home because the wolf would surely be in a terrible mood when he awoke. So the 7 kids all ran back to the house and watched from the window to see the wolf awake. When the wily wolf awoke, he was very thirsty and he thought to himself, "I shall go down to the stream and take a drink because the 6 kids in my belly must be really thirsty." The wily wolf struggled to his feet and he smiled to himself when he heard the rocks rumbling in his belly. When he got to the stream, he leant down to take a good drink, but the rocks in his belly were so heavy that he fell headfirst into the water and was washed clean away. The wolf floated on the water, and the stream passed right before the kids' house, and they laughed when they saw the wily wolf wash past. But the wolf could not swim and was drowned in the deep. And if that wily wolf had not drowned, my tale would have never ended. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Foolish Man. Many, many years ago, in a land far, far away, there lived a man and his wife. And I'm sorry to tell you that the man was not very clever. In fact, the man was a fool. And every day his wife had to tell him what to do and how to do it. The man and his wife had a cow, and one day his wife said, "Why don't you take the cow to market to sell it?" So the man dressed her foolish husband in his best clothes, and he left for the market with the cow. It was a very hot summer's day, and a cloud of flies began to bother the cow and make it run back and forth all over the place. And as they were walking, they met a man with a pig. "Kind sir, wouldn't you prefer to swap your troublesome cow for this pig?" "Oh, but of course I would," he said, and they made the exchange. So now the foolish man had a pig, but the pig was harder to control than the cow had been, and the foolish man did not like it at all. And as they were walking, they met a man carrying a goose. "Kind sir, wouldn't you prefer to swap your troublesome pig for this goose?" "Oh, but of course I would." Well, the goose was no better. It made a terrible mess, its feathers stuck to the foolish man's clothes, and he soon grew tired of carrying it. As they walked, they passed a man by the side of the road who was selling sharpening stones, and the man said, "Kind sir, wouldn't you prefer to swap your troublesome goose for this sharpening stone?" "Oh, but of course I would." So the foolish man was now left with nothing more than a sharpening stone, and he turned around and set off back home. And as he walked, he passed a pond with ducks swimming on it. The foolish man thought he would like to take a duck home for his wife, so he threw the sharpening stone, it sank into the pond, and all the ducks flew away. Now what am I going to do? No cow, no pig, no goose, no sharpening stone, no nothing. So he took off all his clothes and waded into the pond to find the sharpening stone. He searched the pond but could not find it anywhere. And when he came out of the water, he discovered that someone had stolen all of his clothes. So the foolish man was forced to walk home naked. The foolish man was very hungry when he got home, and so he cut himself a slice of bread and went down into the cellar to have a drink of wine. So he put the bread on the step and looked around to see that the dog had made off with it. He then threw the wine tap at the dog, so all the wine spilled out of the barrel onto the floor. A goose sat in the corner hatching eggs, and the goose said, "Gaggle, gaggle, gaggle." "You're going to tell my wife?" "Gaggle, gaggle, gaggle, hiss, hiss." And the goose went on making a terrible din. So the foolish man grabbed the goose, wrung its neck, and threw it out into the yard. Then he poured a bag of flour into the wine and some feathers, rolled around in it, and sat on the eggs. His wife then came down into the cellar and said, "What on earth is going on here?" She looked around at the spilled wine, the flour, and the feathers and saw something sitting on the eggs. "What kind of monster is this? You had better say something before I knock your head off. It's me, dear wife. Don't hurt me." "Where's the cow?" "I swapped it for a pig." "So where's the pig?" "I swapped it for a goose." "So where's the goose?" "I swapped it for a sharpening stone." "So where's the sharpening stone?" "I threw it into the pond. I wanted to hit a duck so I could bring it home to you." "And where are your clothes?" "Somebody stole them while I was looking for the sharpening stone." "Oh, you foolish man." And she pulled him off the eggs and gave him the beating of his life. The foolish man's wife never sent him anywhere again after that, and did everything herself because it was safer that way. And that is the end of my story.